Most of you know it, so I'm not going to keep it very brief. But essentially, I'm the operations designer at Chilisoft. So that's quite a cool role where I get to play with lots of different things. Everything ranging from sort of how do we write software to how do we do intentional practice, deliberate practice, how do we structure the teams, etc. And obviously get to play with it with a lot of people at Chilisoft. So we kind of all work in that space of trying to figure out how do we optimize the performance of teams related to software development. And I have the cool role where I get to plug into all those different teams that are doing different things and trying to understand what they're doing and what we can do, and reading a lot and thinking a lot. So what we're going to talk about briefly today is one of the things I've been doing a lot of work in recently is wearable technology. Well, recently, by recently I mean the last 10 years. But it's become more and more prevalent in the last 2 years in terms of the business. But to understand why I care about wearable technology or what this has any meaning on at all, I want to just start with looking at how we achieve or what we're actually doing in the software development world and where we are. So one of the theories that we've been looking at and working quite hard on is that peak performance only happens at the edge of chaos. So if you take this guy here, he's in a laminar flow state, so he's still in a controlled, structured state, but he's incredibly close to chaos. And if his knee just clicks the ground, he's going to be in the trees somewhere, and he'd probably be dead. And if he's alive, he'll come back and figure out how not to do that next time. But if you're wanting to get around the corner really, really fast, and you want to win the race, you've got to be pushing yourself at the edge of chaos. And you've got to be really, really comfortable at that edge of chaos. And this is why we do so many things, and this is actually why Agile works, as compared to previously, where we used to try push ourselves far away from chaos. Agile practices allow us to get closer and closer to the chaos and a bit away from the structure. And how do we get away from structure towards chaos? What do we have? Because it's quite an interesting dilemma that we face. Because structure gives us certainty, it gives us reliability, it gives us a reliability of results, but it never gives us a winning strategy. Chaos is extremely dangerous, and if you can't handle being near chaos, you're going to land up in the trees and dead. But if we want to win, we have to be near chaos. So how do we handle it? What do we do? So we start doing what these guys do. We practice really, really hard so that we can deal with being near chaos. So these are the things we start to do in Agile. When you start to do daily scrums, you start to do that type of stuff. You're building up the feedback loops so that you can make all these micro adjustments so that you can be close to chaos. You start to do things like TDD, so you're making all these micro adjustments so that you can be nearer chaos. We do quite a lot of deliberate practice in our organization, and the purpose of deliberate practice is so that you can drive yourself closer to chaos. The better skilled your team is, and I don't know if you guys were in the early days of Agile in sort of 2099, where they were like, well, you get the best developers. Agile works. They get the best developers, only works for the best developers, put them in a room, and then take all these rules away and do this stuff, and magic happens. But if you have anything less than those best developers, who knows? Okay. Nowadays, what's happening is we're running Agile on teams with normal developers, with not only the wunderkinds. And what we've learned to do, what we're having to learn to do, is how to train all of these people to be able to be on the edge of chaos or closer to chaos. I mean, not every single programmer is going to be able to work at the edge of chaos, and not every team will be able to work at the edge of chaos, right at that edge. But what we want to do is be able to push ourselves slightly closer to that edge, and over the years slightly closer and slightly closer and slightly closer. And this is why we work together, train as teams together, train as individuals together, do reflective practice, retrospectives, do all of this. It's all about moving ourselves to a team that can run close to the edge of chaos. Okay? Because that's the only way to get around that corner fast. And this is a motorbike example, but if you take a canoeing example or kayaking example, which is close to my heart because that's the sports that I do. If you want to shoot a grade 5 rapid, and you jump in the first day and you go, okay, I'm going to shoot this grade 5 rapid. Never ever done this before, you're going to die. Yeah. When you want to go shoot a grade 5 rapid, you make sure you can Eskimo roll. You can do it backwards, you can do it sideways, you can do it front roll, you can do a hand roll, you can, if you come out, you can roll. And then you put some safety kit on, and you maybe have a friend who's ready to throw your rope. Yes? So you put some stuff around you. You don't just chaotically go in and say, let's dive into the middle of chaos. You put the structures in place, you train yourself, you make sure you're able to do it. And this is what we're trying to do. Okay? And this is where this whole progression to mastery that people are talking about so much comes into play. Click. Okay? So I went for a totally different way than I normally present this time. I just drew a whole lot of things and scanned them in. So excuse the childish drawings, but that's mine. Okay, so what we're looking at here is this progression to mastery. So when somebody comes into software development or any field, anything you're trying to learn, they start off and they're in this unconscious incompetence phase. Alright? And this means they don't know what they don't know. It's a terrible term, but it's a beautiful term at the same time. Like, this is the guy who comes out of varsity, thinks he knows everything, and doesn't yet know he doesn't know. The very first thing that you have to do as a boss is move them into conscious incompetence, the beginning of that, which is like, you don't know anything. Okay, now we've got somewhere to work from. This is a very uncomfortable place for people to be. They don't like being here. Alright? And so what we often want to do is we want to run back there. So typically whenever you're training somebody, they start getting in here and they go, nah, this is shit, this is rubbish practice. It won't work in my organization, it won't work for me, it won't work for the type of software I'm writing. Yeah, you don't understand my managers, you don't understand my business analysts, you don't understand. It's not the same. Yeah, so I can run back. Alright? And that's typically what happens here in this time frame. Okay? What we have to do is we have to learn, if we want to achieve mastery, if we want to be able to go to that edge of chaos, we have to learn the discipline ourselves and as teams to be able to push through this phase. It's a very difficult phase. Normally, and this is an emotionally difficult phase, most people start to just enter this phase and that's where they stop now. And this phase here, and this is unfortunate, this is a real problem in our software development world, is that when they've done stats, most of the software devs, even with 10, 12 years experience, they've just hit this phase. Alright? They're able to do the job. And this is typically the guy who comes into work, they can do whatever is expected for them to do, they can deliver it on time, they can, and then they can do their job. Alright? They're never going to produce anything amazing or anything great. They just can do their job. The problem with these guys here is they pretty much get stuck here. And I've heard software developers who gave up and started doing other things. And they said, well, I was in the game for 6 years and I got bored. Bored? Doing software development? It's an impossibility. It's an absolute impossibility. But what happened is they didn't get bored, they just got stuck here. And they got stuck in this phase. So what we have to now be able to do is push through this phase. Okay? And this phase is a lot of intentional practice, a lot of learning, a lot of reading, a lot of processing your own skill. This is a very hardcore phase. Okay? But there's some personal lessons we have to learn in this phase. Like we have to learn the ability to go and read the books and do the work and do the deliberate practice and do all of those things that allow us to transcend into this unconscious competence phase. So in the unconscious competence phase, this is a wonderful phase where you can see the solutions without having to think about it. They emerge. So you're suddenly dealing with this reality because you're starting to push quite close to chaos here. So you're starting at chaos. What's happening in chaos is the patterns are just emerging. They're just coming out. You don't quite know what they are yet. In this phase here, somebody's giving you a recipe. They're going, you need a repository, and you need this, and you need that, and you need that, and you do these things, and you will write great code. What's happening at this point here is you just can see these two things need to be separated. And this needs to go here, and that needs to go there. And like somebody says, why? How did you know that? It's like I can see it. I just, Okay? It's that phase. It's a wonderful phase. And it's really in this phase that we can create amazing stuff. But the interesting thing about that phase is it's also not the end. Alright? There's a stage further than that. And the stage further than that is when we can actually move to the guru, or the teacher, or the trainer, when we can start to see this emergent reality. And instead of just being able to see the emergent reality, we can see the emergent reality and we can start to train other people how to see this reality that's emerging. We can start to explain it. So what we're able to do is we're able to take this chaos emergent reality and bring it down further, so that we can actually explain to people. We can use words, we can use pictures, we can use diagrams, and explain this emergent reality to people. Okay? And this is what I talk about as the consciousness funnel. We'll see it later. Okay? It's a funnel of how we bring reality into existence. Okay? So that's when we start to transcend into guru phase. The other thing that we can transcend out of this is we can transcend ourselves out of our particular realm. So we're either transcending in the same realm into guru phase. The other thing we can start to do is when you go through this phase, you get an incredible amount of personal mastery. Because ultimately, to get through all of these phases requires personal mastery. It's not skill mastery only. Our brain changes fundamentally at a neuron level. Our brain changes if we get through this entire cycle. And we're now able to master other topics and other subjects and other practices and other skills if we understand what we did here. Okay? So now we suddenly can transcend into a new realm. So suddenly you can take a software developer who transcends into the most amazing UX designer, or business owner or entrepreneur or something else, where they understand how to take any topic and move themselves through the cycle and transcend themselves into the other cycle. And this is what I call true mastery, is when you've moved out of this. The other thing that happens with these true masters when you get into that stage is suddenly you can see things that don't exist. So most of this phase here was about owning your box. Alright? At this point here, you own your box completely. You know that box inside out. Once you own your box, then you can start to see things that are outside the box. So then you can destroy the box that you've spent 10,000 hours mastering. And that's the transcendence that occurs at this point, is when you can see beyond that box and destroy it. Does it make sense? Okay, so this is what we're trying to do. In Chilisoft, and any of the guys here I know for sure are interested in this, otherwise you wouldn't be at these type of presentations. We're trying to figure out how do we consistently and reliably move ourselves through this curve, and how do we consistently and reliably move our software developers and our teams through this curve. Because greatness happens when you transcend out there. That's where the great products happen. That's where the great innovations happen. Okay. Click in the right place. Okay. So one of the things about this whole mastery curve is to understand what's happening in your brain when you're flowing through mastery. So this is something that I kind of invented, and I've taken a couple of things to try to figure this out. But essentially, if you look at flow, anybody here read, what's it, Chick Sent Me High? Almost impossible surname. Chick, that one. Chick Muck Sent Me High, I don't know. I just remember Chick Sent Me High, and I'm like, I was like, I want to meet that one. Okay, so what he basically talks about is this flow zone. Okay, but the way he draws it is typically as a zone of flow. It's parallel. And below here is boredom. So if you're doing a task that is below your ideal flow zone, you're bored. If you're doing a task that's above your ideal flow zone, you're going to get frustrated. It's too difficult for you. Does that make sense? So in my hypothesis on what's happening with mastery is that if we practice mastery, which means we do the intentional practice, which means we do the boring things that are down here, okay, but we also take the challenging tasks that are above our skill set, what we actually do is we open up this curve over time. So this is your career. Okay? So if you do your grind, anyone play grind games? Yeah? If you do your grind, which is the necessary things to acquire those skills that ding, 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 ding. No, it's not sounding right, it's not sounding right. Okay, now I've got it, now I've lost it. That's what's happening here. If you're trying to learn that rhythm that you don't have a chance, you don't know how to play, that impossible Beethoven rhythm or something like that, you're out there. And by taking this progression to mastery, we actually increase this band of when we can be in flow. And eventually, when you transcend out of that unconscious competence phase, your flow band is so wide that almost every task you can be in the flow. You can be in that flow of energy. It just works. Everything's just flowing through you. Okay? And that's the hypothesis that I'm working on. So what does any of this have to do with wearable tech? I don't know. We'll get there. Okay. So this is kind of another view of what I've been trying to say. But what I'm looking at here is sitting up at the top here is this crazy chaos that we're sensing. That unconscious competent guy is sensing, is able to sense the reality as it emerges. Sitting it down at the bottom here is conscious action, concrete action. So what we do is we've got to sense this reality, and sensing it alone is not of any use. We've got to sense it and we've got to do something with it. We've got to create something with it. And then from the creation of something, we actually have the ability to go and sense more. Okay? Because at this point, all we're doing is we're tapping into the infinite possibility. Because if we're on that edge of chaos, anything is possible. Because nothing has yet happened. Okay? So at this point, it's infinite possibility. At this point, it's one possibility. We've taken it down to one possibility. Alright? But there's infinite detail at this level. Alright? So what we're trying to do as mastery, what we're trying to do is be able to sense the infinite possibility that is occurring and bring it down into something concrete in our reality. And that's where I was talking about transcending the mastery. So when you can now sense it and you can bring it down and you create it, and you can see the new design pattern and you can document it and you can explain it to somebody else. You manage to take something you're sensing and bring it down into something concrete in a diagram, or something concrete in words, or something concrete in a product. And now if you stop at that point, you've, in my opinion, failed. As a master, what you now do is you take the knowledge that you've acquired in bringing this down and you use it to project yourself back up. And when you project yourself back up, you go back into sensing. And the more you can do this, the higher you can actually, the more energy you can create. And the more energy you can create, the further to chaos you can push your brain and yourself. And then when you bring it down, you have to bring all those skills together to be able to take this stuff you're sensing and make it real. So you've got to bring all those skills to play to bring yourself down here. When you're down here, you can use all the knowledge you acquired to project yourself further. And then you can use all those skills that you had acquired in the last cycle to bring yourself down again. So this is a virtuous cycle of using your skill, your hardcore skill, to bring reality, this down into reality, and then using your analysis of this reality to project yourself back up and sense more. And this is basically the cycle that as you grow and you create and you do it more and more frequently, you're able to push further and further out. And this is what I talk about by driving at the edge of chaos. Because the skills, you have to have the skills to be able to take this. I've worked with people, graphic designers are particularly good at this. They often have brains that work very well at the edge of chaos. And when they're junior, they don't have the ability to bring it into reality. So they can see this stuff, but they don't have the skill yet to picture it. Now, a great artist is somebody who can see that reality, and they've got the skills to be able to see this emergent reality and they have the skills to make it real so that other people can also see it. So that emergent reality is now available through the concrete action to other people. And as a software developer, that's what we're doing. Because software developers are just great artists. Our medium happens to be lines of code. But we've got this continual interplay between seeing chaos, infinite possibility, and bringing products into reality. And so the top curve is just trying to go into that in a bit more detail. Anyway, I was just saying the same thing. I'm collapsing it into a single reality, and then I'm taking the infinite detail and deriving from that infinite detail back up. Okay? So if you think about it, this is just two types of thinking. So when people talk about integrative thinking, this is the new sort of management buzzword that everyone's going through everywhere. Integrative thinking. Integrative thinking is just the ability to perceive, to sense reality, and then to see detail and deduce new possibilities from the detail. Okay? So what software development gives us the ability to do is to become integrative thinkers, if we understand how to do it well. Because by its very nature, we continually have to go through the cycle. Okay? And this is the reason why software developers are like, I don't know if any of you have read articles about the ages of various careers. So at one stage, the engineers were the dominant people. So the people who ran all the companies were engineers. This was, in the mechanical era, industrialization, etc. Then we moved out of that, and then accountants ran all the companies. So the CAs ran all the top companies. Nowadays, who runs all the top companies? Software developers. Or people who hang out with software developers. Like Steve Jobs' case, I have to give him some credit. So if you're not a software developer, find a really, really good software developer, hang out with them a lot, you'll become successful. Or become a software developer. But the reason is that we actually have, our training as software developers is training us uniquely with the skills that we need to have integrative thinking, which is the skills that we need to run companies in today's world, where we are trying to drive our organizations close to the edge of chaos. Okay. So this is just another way of showing that same funnel. Okay? Infinite possibility. We bring down the funnel down into some reality. We study that reality. We push ourselves out through the curve and back. And this is just a three-dimensional. This is two-dimensional, but obviously this is a three-dimensional toroid. So this is actually a mathematical construct of the toroid of the probability funnel. Okay? So what we're wanting to do is push ourselves as far up there as possible. And then take as much action down here as possible. I'm going to talk about shortly how wearable technology helps us do that. And I put this one in just because I loved the drawing that I did. No, okay, so this is just about that cycle of continually pushing through generates this incredible amount of energy, because teams love working on the edge of chaos. Like, it's incredibly inspiring. It's an incredibly nice place to work when you're sitting and this energy is pulsing through the organization. Okay, don't worry about that one. All right, so wearable technology. Where does wearable technology have anything to do with anything? Okay, so one of the things I'm looking at is we've got things like this, which is just a simple EEG reader. So you put it on, measures your brain waves. Okay, what you can do here is you can actually practice how to calm your brain down and observe reality. Okay, so if you're wanting to push yourself up this funnel, if you want to push yourself up the funnel, what you have to be able to do is be able to observe reality as it is unfolding. So anyone who's done user experience design at all? Anyone here? No? You've done some? Okay. Anyone done lean? Say lean? No? Yeah? Okay, so user experience design and lean, they come from the base thing. If you're going lean, they talk about going to the Gemba. Right? The basis of lean, go to the Gemba. There's no truth in your office. The only truth that exists is out there in reality. This UX design, the basis of UX design is ethnographic research. It's the exact same thing. It's just a nice fancy term. Go there and study what is actually happening. Okay, don't make assumptions in your office. Okay? The ability to truly study it is what pushes you up here. So if you take someone like Darwin, he spent years on a ship going over there. He was an average academic. They kind of sent him over because, like, the good academics didn't want to spend 4 years on a ship traveling to some godforsaken island. So his job was to go there, select a whole lot of samples, and ship it back to the good academics who were going to make the real breakthroughs. Okay, but those 4 years that he spent going overseas, sitting on that ship, he was bored out of his mind. He had nothing to do besides observe. So what he did is he sat and he wrote observation logs, endless observation logs. Like, this guy gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning on most days, but when he's had too much to drink, he gets up at 5:15. When this guy walks in the room and he's like that, he's a bit aggressive. He's had a bad day. Like, endless detail of observations. So by the time he got to the islands, he was in a unique position where his observation skills had been trained so that he could see what was happening. He could see that reality that didn't exist in their world. The reality that he proposed was so opposed to every belief system that existed at the time that the only way he could disclose that new world was by having incredible observation skills and being able to sense that new reality coming through. Because he had to break down almost every belief system that he had been trained to believe. Okay? So what we can do with technology is we can use technology to help us train our brains to do that. By using feedback, by training ourselves to be quiet. The other thing we can start to train our brains to do is to focus. It sounds similar, but it's not the same thing. So the one thing is to be able to observe reality as it's occurring. The other thing is to be able to focus narrowly on a single task. Both of them are absolutely crucial. Okay? If I'm going into this funnel, if I'm going in here, this is how I take action in the world. This is how I sense new realities. If I'm going to take action in the world, I can take action in the world only if I can remain focused. If I'm getting distracted by my emails, by blah, 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 I can't take action in the world. Okay? Does it make sense? So what we can do with this technology is we can train ourselves to see that, and we can train ourselves to be focused so that we can take action in the world. And this type of technology can be used for both. So that's the one thing we can do with this technology. The other thing that we can do with this type of technology, so take that off for now. I've got this here. This is a breathing strip. So all you do is you put it around your chest and you can monitor your breathing. It's incredibly powerful because there's certain states of breathing that are associated with high productivity states. There's certain states of breathing that are associated with creative states. There's certain ways that you can train your breathing so that you can enter into highly creative states. There's certain ways you can train your breathing that you can enter into highly focused states. This is not new. The Indians have been doing it for 5,000 years. This is old technology. In that way. The difference is that you've got an amazing way of giving you the feedback now. It's much, much harder to sit in an ashram and figure out, put your hand on your abdomen and figure out what your breathing is doing, and then you lose focus. Okay, so what we're doing with this type of stuff is that we can give ourselves continual feedback while we're training. So that when I lose focus and I stop watching my breathing, it can say, hey, your breathing's gone off, and okay, and I can come back. So we can intensify the period of time that it takes you to train these mental skills dramatically by monitoring these things. This is the other one you can see this is a nice hack me job. This was made by us. Okay, so this is using a simple infrared sensor. Very simple, changing voltage down. And you clip it on your ear. We've written software that can now monitor what your heart is doing, how your heart is actually pulsing. Now the interesting thing about that is that your heart is at the base of your control of your I'm going to jump out of too much detail. Going into too much detail. Okay, so basically what happens is controlling your heart turns out to have a direct connection between your heart and your limbic system in your brain, which is your fight and flight response. So the state that your heart is in directly affects how much fight and flight response you have in your brain. Okay? If you can train your heart, the quickest way to train the fight and flight response in your brain is to train your heart. Okay? The vagus nerve connects directly from your heart hardwired in. It's the only thing that goes directly from any part of your body into your brain without going through your spinal column, is the vagus nerve. Everything else goes straight into your spinal column and into your brain. This goes direct. Okay? You've also got the most neurons in your body outside of your brain are around your heart. Okay? So what we start to do is we start to train our heart to beat in certain rhythms. Okay? And it turns out, anyone doing engineering here? No, anyone know what a resonance frequency is? Okay? Okay, so from engineering, for those people who don't know, like you take a certain structure, and if you get it to vibrate at a certain frequency, when that starts to vibrate at that frequency, it'll just continue to vibrate at that frequency. And if you do get the perfect frequency, it'll eventually vibrate at that frequency, stronger amplitudes, until like a bridge will come down. So there's been bridges that have fallen down, really well-made bridges, that the wind was blowing at exactly the right speed, and it started to vibrate at that frequency, and eventually and the whole bridge collapsed. It turns out that your heart has a certain resonant frequency, and at that frequency it goes into what we call a coherent pattern. And when you go into that coherent pattern, your limbic system just starts to detune dramatically. Okay? And the ability to detune your limbic system means that you've got more power in your prefrontal cortex. Okay, because you only have a limited amount of power going into your brain at any point in time. And that power is split equally between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. So if you can detune your limbic system, you can actually release the prefrontal cortex. And that's just step one. So the first step is just to detune your limbic system, allow your prefrontal cortex to operate better. The second step is you can actually now tune your limbic system for positive. So we always think of the limbic system as a fight and flight response. The limbic system also has the ability to be an attractive response. So you can actually have a positive attraction to things, not only a negative attraction in your limbic system. So when you can start to train your limbic system, but once you've learned how to detune it so it doesn't like cause disruptions in your prefrontal cortex, you can now actually train your limbic system up into a positive attraction. And now it starts to be a positive force on your prefrontal cortex towards positive results. And when we talk about organizations, we just talk about that as a mood. Okay? The mood of the organization. So anyone who's experienced mood, I don't know, like on a personal level, I walk into the office and this friend of mine disses me or doesn't acknowledge me, and or even worse, maybe I have a fight with my wife as I leave the office, and I arrive at the office 5 minutes later, and I'm sitting down and I'm trying to work. How much good work do I get done? Okay, very limited. Then if I can detune that, that's the first thing. Now imagine if I arrive in the office and I'm like excited. This is amazing. Like I'm loving the people I'm working with. This is an exciting project. We're doing such cool stuff. That's now where I'm talking about the positive thing. So the first thing is to detune it, so we learn how to not be distracted by the negative. Then we start to tune it up so that we attract it into the positive. So that's what we're trying to develop here. We're not trying, we've developed it. That's that part. So we developed the software and everything that goes around that simple device. Okay? And that's all about how do we train ourselves to be better. So that's quite important for this whole biofeedback, neurofeedback, wearable tech, and there's a ton of more stuff in this realm. So if anyone's interested, just come and talk to me. I've got all sorts of interesting things that are about the training. Okay? So some of the other stuff I've got here, so it doesn't like me shut. Alright. So can you try get that back up? It shouldn't take long, just get it started. It's just, you need to probably log in. I'll grab it. So what we do with this is it's another way of training our brains. What this does is it flashes lights, LED lights at a certain frequency, and it gives us a certain frequency of audios through the audio signal. I actually use real headphones for that. And what we can do with this is we can entrain our brains into certain mind states that are positive. So instead of actually training our brains, which is the one thing we do here, where we teaching ourselves how to move ourselves into that mind state. One of the things we can help with is we can actually train our brains into those mind states using this type of technology. So anyone know the sort of study with pendulums? If you take pendulum clocks and you start them swinging in any random order, over time they sync. Okay, this is just using that same phenomena on your brain. So if you pass certain frequencies into your brain, and first in flashing light, your brain synchronizes in to that pattern. Okay, so what we do, this is for me like when they're training swimmers on how to reach their peak performance. If you guys have read much about that, where they drag them through the water. They like actually put ropes on them, and they drag them through the water 5% faster than what they can actually swim. They're still swimming, but they're dragging them through the water so that their brain gets used to what it feels like to move through the water faster. And that's how they teach them how to perform at that higher level. Okay? That's what we're trying to do with this. So what we're doing here is we're training our brains how to reach those states that we may not yet know how to reach. So we're showing our brain what that state is. So that then when we use the feedback, our brain already has a pattern, knows how to go. It knows that state exists, and it can actually start to move into that state. So that's the other thing we start to play with for peak performance. All right. So that's clearly the part of this whole talk that I'm passionate about. Some of the other things in wearable technology that are being done is we can start to do experience design with this. So we've got the ability, and I've got one of these headsets at home, I didn't bring it, but with these headsets we can actually determine whether somebody's having a positive response or a negative response to something. We can determine whether somebody's bored or not bored. So if I had enough of these devices, which I only have one and 2 more arriving sometime this month, hopefully. They were supposed to arrive in April, but they haven't arrived yet. The demand, I think, is just insane at the moment. But we could put these devices on people in the audience right here. I could. And I could actually be watching feedback, maybe projected at the back of the wall, that tells how bored I've made people. And if my audience is starting to get bored, I can actually start to change my design. I can be, okay, like, get rid of that. Stop talking about that shit, Brett, move on. Or like, hey, the class is getting bored, let me do something interesting, I'll do a handstand quickly, or whatever the case may be. But I can actually start to monitor my experience in real life, and how people are responding. So what these guys are doing here is they've got eye tracking goggles, head tracking, and EEG. So they can monitor somebody walking through a city, and as they look at things, how they respond. And they can start to redesign cities to be more aesthetically pleasing, more joyful. Because, that sculpture was bad. And a lot of people respond that way. Okay, let's get rid of that sculpture. That building was not aesthetically pleasing. So people are starting to use these things to redesign buildings, to redesign experiences. For in the software dev game, I mean, hell, I want to go do usability testing. Shove a whole lot of these devices on people and see where they're getting frustrated in my software. So that's the next thing that we're talking about going. I mean, this is not an area that I'm doing any work on at all. All the work I'm doing is on the other stuff. But I'm just showing you some of the broader aspects. Okay, so we talked about taking action in the world, and I talked about focus for taking action in the world. But the other way we can take action in the world is using these devices to actually control things. So people are already doing this. This guy's using EEG to fly his helicopter. And actually flying the helicopter around and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, just using his ability to control his thoughts. So that's the other place that we can talk about, and I'll talk about that a whole lot more. Okay, so this is incredibly interesting. If we go back to this curve here, so not only can we train our focus, okay, because to be able to fly that helicopter, you actually have to train a reasonable amount of focus. Ask any of us at Chilisoft that have been trying, it's pretty hard. But you've got to train your focus, but once you can train that focus, what you're suddenly doing is you're removing the longest time delay in getting your thoughts into action, which is your keyboard, your interface device. How do you actually interface into the world? So if you think about what's happening in our world today, we're doing business at the speed of thought, except for the delay in what it takes us to get our thought through the keyboard onto the computer, and the delay it takes to take it off the screen and back into our brains. That's where the two delays are. The delay is not in getting the data anywhere, because that's all happening at light speed. Okay? So we're moving ourselves into a world where we can interface with each other at the speed of light. And who knows what happens there? Because eventually time stops becoming all sorts of crazy shit starts to happen when you're doing it at the speed of light. So what we're suddenly finding is that not only if we can start to perceive things coming into us using our brains, and we can start to push things out just using our brains without the delays of keyboards and mice and all of this ugly technology, we're suddenly at the point where we can actually start to move things through this cycle of our own, plus the entire network of people at the speed of thought, at the speed of light. So that's the end of my talk, I think. So I try to keep it really simple so that if anyone had questions, they could give me a shout.
I've got some, Brett, very first. I wanted to ask you to give an example of the sensing computational sensing process in software dev. I think I have an idea of what that would look like.
Okay.
So what would that process look like? We're creating something concrete and using that almost.
Okay. So we can jump straight into, thank you, that question is just the best question I could ever ask for, because we jump into my second favorite thing, TDD.
Well, not a leading question.
Yeah, I could have, he's wearing a chili soft t-shirt, I slipped that question to him. Okay, so what we do with TDD is we start off with saying, the first thing we do is we get to red, which is what problem do I want to solve? What is the thing? Then we go into get to green. So now I've taken something concrete. I've created something concrete. And all I want to do is that concrete point is make it work. So we always go for do the simplest thing, do the thing that is easiest to get to work, not necessarily great design, all of that stuff. So that's, for me, taking the infinite possibility, and now I've created something concrete. The next step that we do is we often call it refactor. What I'm trying to teach now in TDD is the next step is reflect. So now we look at that code and we study it and we go, what's going on here? And we study it. The problem with reflect is everyone wants to start writing new code. The reflection is crucial. So now I study it, and I'm looking at that detail, the thing I've created, and I start to see what possibilities are out of there. Is there a class coming out there? Is there a method coming out there? Is there a variable? Is there a term? Is there a concept? So for me, TDD is all about searching for these concepts. So if I can find my clicker, if I can use that. There we go. So let me go back to the funnel. Okay, so what we're doing, and we're taking this concrete action. We've written some code. Now we're looking at that code. We're looking at the detail of that code. And we're saying, okay, maybe there's this concept here. Let me name this variable. Simple stuff. There's this magic number here. Let me extract that and put something on it. So if you talk about the string charter, that's a delimiter. A concept came out. So the concept lives here. A concept like that lives above the level of code. A delimiter. Alright? So by studying what was going on, I ejected myself up to delimiter. And then maybe I write some more code and I study it some more. And I see, hey, wait a second, I've got a delimiter parser. So I've got a higher concept, because now I've got a delimiter. Now I've got a thing that knows how to parse delimiter. So I've got a new class came out. So that new class emerged. I didn't design it up front. It emerged from a study of this and a study of this. And as I do that, I get higher and higher level concepts. And the higher level concepts that we can program it, the better, more readable and understandable our code is. Especially if that high level concepts are supported by the detail. So that you can move from a high level concept down to the detail, and from the detail back up to the high level concept. So when somebody now comes to study your code, they have the exact same thing. They've got a delimiter parser concept. Inside there, they've got a bunch of methods. Inside those, they've got some concrete code that actually does this stuff. So when they learn your code, they learn it through this exact same loop that we derived it. And if you write your code really, really well, it allows somebody to read your code and reach the same understanding as the way you actually derived it. So you derived the concepts, and they're now going to take the concepts and understand them from reading it down. And that's why we always talk about it being like a book. You've got the high level concepts, and then you've got the infinite detail. Okay, does that make sense? And ultimately, at the highest level, we've got pictures, which is your design pattern. So nobody can possibly think, the first time you do a design pattern, nobody can ever think of a design pattern as a bunch of words. A design pattern has to be a bunch of pictures. We then call it a factory pattern, which is a label, it's a lower level. But at the higher level, it's a bunch of pictures. So if you look at the way our consciousness has evolved, we were drawing pictures long before we were using words. So the high level of consciousness is pictures, and the lower level of consciousness is words. Make sense?
Just a question. This almost seems to represent hemispheres of the brain trying to have mastery of both.
Correct. Yeah.
So we're talking about the creative and the logical coming together, mixing these harmony, pushing each other.
Yeah. That's the basis of integrative thinking. So integrative thinking is about harmonizing both, not thinking that creativity by itself is of any use, and not thinking that doing by itself is of any use. The ability to do both together, to do both types of reasoning and both types of logic and be able to integrate it. So a lot of these concepts, this funnel, if I take this funnel and I turn it on its side and I plot it like that, which is just, that's divergent, understanding, convergent. That's integrative thinking. So that's the exact same model that we have for integrative thinking. Have you seen the integrative thinking model?
Yes,
Yeah. So it's divergent thinking, and grouping concepts, and then convergent onto an answer. And then you use that answer to divergent, grouping concepts, convergence. And you do that as an endless play. So, yeah, it's a recursive algorithm. The problem I have with it is that it looks linear. Okay, because it looks like it's a linear thing, but it's not linear. So that's why I prefer this way. Because to me it shows the loop, it shows the feedback into the system.
Also,
yes. And it represents a whole lot of things that are way too esoteric for me to discuss at a group like this. Yeah. You have to come for a private talk on the esoteric meaning behind this stuff. Any other questions?
Sorry, I'm going to the goggles one talked about getting into a pattern.
Yeah.
The brain into a certain brain state. Can you explain how that's... This is also not fun. These are things I went to that. But can you explain how that, like if I bring my brain into a certain pattern, how that helps me to say software development or analysis?
Okay.
Yes, design work.
Cool. Right. So we've got a couple of brain states. The bottom end is delta. That's the slowest brain state. Typically, that's associated with sleep. In very experienced meditators, they will still be awake and in deep delta. So they've learned how to be able to do that. But for most of us, if you're in delta, you're asleep. Sitting just above that is alpha. So alpha is typically associated with your creative mind states. Okay, alpha is running like at your 7.2, 8 hertz frequencies. So it's a really like slowish frequency. It happens to be the frequency at which the universe vibrates. Okay, so the vibration that they measure in the universe is at that same vibration of alpha, and it's your highly creative state. So that's, if I'm getting into some of the esoteric, that's going on up there, right? What you then do is you move from alpha into your beta mind states. So you've got low beta and high beta. Low beta and high beta are focused mind states. So you're transitioning out of this highly creative mind state into a focused mind state. So if you typically look at an ADD kids are battling. Okay, so somewhere in between those two is theta, but I'm going to talk about that just now. ADD kids battle to stay in beta. So they battle to remain in focus. Okay? So something like that will train their brain how to enter that state and hold it for slightly longer periods of time, and then using the feedback will train them to be able to enter and hold that state of their own volition. Okay?
Yeah, I think they're practicing going into that.
Yeah. Their brain starts to learn what is possible. So the whole way the brain works is that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you can get those neurons firing together, those neural pathways start to set up. And the more set up those neural pathways are, the more easy they are to access and use. So that's the whole sort of mind philosophy behind this. I mean, I can go into the way neurons work, but I don't think anyone's too interested in that. But I mean, in essence, that's essentially what's going on. Is that's how your brain learns. So then you can get into like gamma, which is a very, very high focus state, and typically that's only found in meditators who've been doing like 20 years of practice plus. But they can hold these incredibly high focus states. So where they can focus on something like absolutely minute and hold their focus there for incredibly long periods of time without distraction. Okay? So that's those sort of mind states. Now theta is the one that sits between delta and alpha. I didn't want to mention it because it's the one that's maybe more complicated to understand. So theta is a very creative mind space if you are coherently in theta. But if you're incoherently in theta, it can be a distracted mind state. So the time when you walk through to the kitchen and you get there and you're like, shit, what was he here for? And then you walk out. And then you get to your bedroom, you go, yeah. And you get back to the kitchen and you're like, what was it? And then eventually you ask your wife and you go, like, I'm trying to get something from the kitchen, what is it? Okay, so I use this to make sure that I don't enter those mind states. This is another piece of wearable tech. It's the most awesome piece of wearable tech. Like, you walk around with it and you go to the kitchen and you're like, I need to go get bread. You get to the office and you're like, I need to do all of these things. And the interesting thing is, like, when you start to unload that off your brain, you start to be able to be more creative. Because your brain's not sitting cycling going, oh, remember you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to do that and you need to do that. It's recorded. And you can get it into some mechanism to manage it. And as soon as you unload your brain, you're able to access more creative stuff. The other interesting thing that happens is if you record your creative thoughts on your dictaphone, then your brain's not having to sit and go, don't forget that, 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 get to the office, remember that. So you're using all your brain cycles just to not forget this amazing creative thought you had. You got it on a dictaphone, you recorded it. What suddenly your brain goes is, wow, that was really cool, I enjoyed that, let me have a whole lot more. So it really works for both the task management side of things as well as the creativity side of things. But that theta state that triggered that off, the theta state is that potentially distractive state. It's that state where your brain's making all sorts of crazy connections, and if you're trying to do something useful, it can be an incredibly destructive state. Okay? But if you're learning how to manage yourself in that state, then it's hyper creative. So alpha is reasonably creative, theta is like hyper creative. Okay? So with ADD kids, what they find is they lapse continually into that theta, but they lapse into what we call incoherent theta. So the pattern of theta is like random, it's chaos. So if you plot it, it's like all these spikes just going everywhere. Whereas somebody who's controlled and trained their brain and learned to access it, they get this coherent brainwave in theta. And so the frequency is not the only indicator of use. There's also how the pattern works, what the signal process does. Yeah. So that's the other brain state. It's a very good brain state to train in, but typically you want to train alpha first. Once you've got alpha waxed, then you start to tackle theta.
So which ones do those novels encourage?
They can do anything.
Okay, so those help you into those states.
Yeah, so I can train into deep sleep. Okay. My favorite routine on these is to reduce my amount of sleep that I have to do. No, seriously. Like, if you want to cut your sleep down to like 5 hours a night, what you can do with these type of things is you can train. I've got a mat that I lie on. It's like got all sorts of spikes on it. It's not wearable tech, so I didn't bring it. So all sorts of spikes on it. It activates points in your back. and helps your body go into a deep sleep state. And then you put this on and you flash the lights in to take you into that deep sleep state. And then you have this incredible sleep, and you only have to sleep like 5 hours a night.
So that encourages those certain frequencies.
Well, if I'm training that routine, if like, I don't know if you've seen me in the office every now and then when I come in and I lie in your guy's office, and I put those on, like I'm trying to, okay, I need to go do something focused, and I'm like distracted. So I'll put those on and I'll lie there for like 20 minutes, and I'll do like a beta training, and then I get up and I go and I do the beta tasks. Like,
I was only asking because you never made the connection. We just talked about the brain a lot.
I was trying to avoid the whole sort of alpha theta thing. I didn't want to kill the people.
Goggles.
Oh,
You talked a lot, but you never did.
sorry.
To the goggles.
Sorry.
Okay, so it would help you get into that. Right?
Whichever state you wanted, yeah.
And it also helps you get into it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can say, I need to know focus, and I have trouble focusing. I could use it to train myself.
It's less useful in training than in the EEG feedback. It kind of shows your brain that state exists, but it's less useful because you're not using feedback loops to train your brain. Your brain trains much better from feedback loops. If you think about how your brain learned, everything is learned by like the feedback it gets from the system. This thing just takes you into that state without the feedback. So it was like I talked about with that swimmer, where you're pulling them through the water, you're showing them that this new state is possible, but the way they learn to get to that new state is still by the training. All you're doing is making it possible. You know, what the guys who do like high-rise walking on ropes, they'll typically stand on at a helicopter and be taken up like 2 k's above the building, so their brain becomes sensitized to being very, very high. So when now they're walking between these 2 high-rise buildings, it doesn't feel that high. Their brain's been sensitized. That's all this is doing. It's sensitizing your brain to that mind state. But the training devices are there to train you into that mind state.
Should they fall, they would find they were quite high.
This is why they train themselves on both mechanisms, so that the probability of them falling reduces. That's the thing about being at the edge of chaos. Like, we are going to fail. Okay, so yeah, that's why I said we do those other practices like TDD, project reviews, retrospectives, weekly sprints, all of this stuff. Those mechanisms are all there to give you the feedbacks into the system and give you the safety nets so that you don't fail dismally and die. Because you want to fail. Like, you can't be at the edge of chaos and not fail. You'll never get to the edge of chaos if you don't fail. But the thing is to fail intelligently. So don't fail, like we're talking about in Chilisoft, we're trying to figure this out still. But so I'll talk through where, I mean, it's unstructured. But failing like because you're too scared to try, that's bad failure in my opinion. Failing because you didn't do something truly audacious, that's not a useful failure. Yeah. Failing because your team and you didn't get on well, that's not really a useful failure. Unless you can really leverage that into the future. Failing because you tried something truly crazy that has never been done before, that's a good failure. Then a really good failure is when you fail trying to do that, and then you look at it and you figure out how to do better the next time. So that's this whole thing. Often this action that you take in the world is going to be a failure. Failure. Okay? The way you leverage that out is what is important. So, and we haven't got the right terms yet, we're still fighting with these concepts. But that's what we're trying to figure out, is how do we fail successfully?
Yeah, I think so your need of generally just stuff. And it's probably that it gets that process.
Yep.
It starts off. So then it pushes you to find those concepts.
Yeah.
It's almost like failing to progress.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
The discussion was very interesting. It's actually a great thing. It's just fascinating how this fits into Chilisoft. And I was just psychologist to hear what you're talking about. Chilisoft. Just fascinating. Where does Chilisoft see itself taking this?
We're developing products around wearable technology. Yeah. So we have Microsoft's an equity investor in our company, and our products are around peak performance, peak human performance, around in the software dev game. So we've got two products.
It's going into like a legal sort of area where you could be teaching people to take themselves in the wrong direction.
So, yeah, now I understand.
You would end up with the mind of that drug that they
Yeah.
hold it to the ball and fingers can have the nose.
Yeah. So we're firmly based in the practices of mindfulness. So we come from that, and mindfulness has been used for like 5,000 years successfully. So, and the scientific studies on it are phenomenal. So that's the basis on which we're coming at it, and obviously the work we're doing is scientifically based. I'm doing a master's at the moment in this. So that's hooking into the research mechanisms, and on top of that, we're studying loads and loads of research papers on what's been done, and then through the practice contributing our own. So you have to be very careful, obviously, when you start to do this stuff, that you're not doing anything that's going to harm. So that's why our first product is this one, which is the heart training. Because there's nothing, when you start to get into the EG, it starts to become maybe a little bit more scary. That's why most of the commercial devices are these very simple ones that just use a single point. Because there's not a lot that you can do, you can't do damage. The other one, I've got some medical grade ones here as well. And then there you suddenly get into the 40k per device type thing, and there you can now put sensors anywhere in your head. You can train this part of the brain to do this, or that part of the brain to do that. And when you're getting into that realm, you're getting into the realm where potentially you could train the part of the person that does XYZ, and they don't want that. It's not good for them. So you have to be careful. I mean, that's why you have almost a split between the consumer grade and the medical grade. And the consumer grade is unregulated, the medical grade is regulated. So I have both, and we play with both, because the medical grade one I bought 12 odd years ago. So we've learned a lot about how to use it. But you wouldn't make a software product using that. The software products you're looking at is the stuff using the consumer grade things that are only focusing on they've got probes only at very specific points in the brain that are very well understood, and the consequences of training those are very well understood. So there's a lot of research. No one's yet made a consumer product in this type of thing we're doing, but there's a lot of research on like training surgeons on certain protocols, training pilots on certain protocols. Most of them are done using the medical grade stuff. The consumer grade stuff is just coming out.